Hey, I wanted to talk about random generation and game design and a couple of other things I think that all kind of coordinate. I saw a conversation or argument, if you will, whatever, um, about using nothing but random tables to generate worlds for campaigns. And one of the comments made is you can't do that. Wouldn't be any cohesion to it. There'd be wonky things like deserts next to swamps. Well, and then there was a reply that said, well, if you look around far enough, you'll find where there is a desert next to a swamp. And here's the thing. These kind of arguments, we've found everybody that I knew in the 70s and 80s would have those arguments and find them irritating. And in order to stop them from occurring, because they would go on ad nauseum, where you had two people who really didn't know all that much about, and I'm not talking about anybody specific in that thread, so don't get mad, but just it's an example where you'd have people going, well, I saw, my dad told me once, or they pull out one nugget of what they felt was some sort of confirmation of their thing, and it didn't have any context to it, or they would just, they'd analogize some scene in a movie, or they just go, well, it feels like this, or I've seen people talk about that in all sorts of different realms. And the solution to that is to go find cold, hard fact and data. Now, a lot of people go, well, that's boring. I'm not going to research in a library to play a game. Okay, but if you want to be a DM or you want to be a game designer, you should. You don't think that people that created three-dimensional, like Sid Meier with Civilization, there wasn't somebody out there that either already knew about or learned about mountain ranges and how things work to create that editor in that game. I'm talking about the original Civilization and Civilization 2 and stuff where you actually own media, not the games that you rent from Steam and call them your own these days. I don't know anything about them, or nor do I care. But in the 90s, in the 80s, when you had real map generators, somebody knew what they were doing. Did they all come out great? No, I had some games that had some map generators that would come out wonky because they weren't developed right. Somebody screwed something up that didn't make them all the same. If you don't do it right, it might produce bad results. But instead of going, well, that's too hard because it won't work, we went and found a way. Did we take a cartography course? No, but we might get some books on the subject and just read a little bit and try to understand it a little bit better so that we could apply it to either design or generation of a campaign or module, and it worked out great. It's much easier to find hard data and apply it. That doesn't mean transcribe it into a rule set that the player has to consume in order to play. That's always the counter argument I get from people. Well, you don't want to make it like that. Then the players. No. The players bullshit. They ain't got nothing to do with the players. You instead of going, well, I think a bullet flies this fast, or I'm pretty sure that this, that, or the other thing, or it feels like this, or I once heard that MP40s fire 40 rounds a second. Go get a book and look it up. Go get a reference book and find out what the rate of fire for that MP40 is. Why screw around with, well, it's good enough if you come up with an 8-sider and that represents rate of fire. Just get the flipping number and write it to flip down. Why is that so That's the kind of thing we did. It just makes it easier. Case closed. Argument settled. There it is, black and white, referenced, citation, chapter and verse. Done. So, now as far as deserts and swamps next to each other, here's what the kind of thing you do. You don't want to read a cartography book? Get a map. Get a topographical map. Not a political map, but a topographical map. And go find a hex grid or make one and put it over there. Okay, then take the scale and measure the hex. How big is the hex, from whatever way you want to measure it that makes sense to you. But you can then see. If I'm making a campaign, a lot of people use 20-kilometer hexes. I know it's not all, some were 12, there was all sorts of discussion. Some connoisseur can give me an entire litany history of the evolution, but I remember a lot of them that were 20 kilometers, and there was the comment that that's basically a day's march. Okay, so take that 20-kilometer, hex grid and put it over a modern topographical map, and then you can start seeing where certain terrain features would indeed work being right next to each other, whereas you might think that that doesn't make any sense. But or change it. You can see if you play with that, like if you know computers and you can get on Google Earth and do that, you can play around with the hex grid if you know how to put one over there. You can make it bigger and smaller, and you can see how the terrain interacts with one another. So as long as you know how that works, then you should be able to create proper tables that create a random terrain that makes sense. It may require more than one table. That's okay. I used to do this. I had some major categories: desert, swamp, arid, Arctic, something like that. And okay, so here's continent number 1. Roll a die, picks what, Arctic came up. Okay, so I go to my Arctic subtable, and that would have all sorts of terrain that would be relevant only to that particular category. And then it would fill out that, so that kind of thing. All sorts of ways to do it to make it work. But go for hard data. Don't go for the super wild ass guess or what feels right or looks good to you. If you and it's perfectly reasonable. My RPG, you could run everything off of random tables. I don't understand the aversion to them. I saw one person go, "Why? What are we going to do? Everything going to be random tables?" Why not? I mean, if you want to make up your own thing and create your own world, without a random table, go great. That's very creative. There is nobody putting you down. But if sooner or later you're going to run out of ideas, or you're just not going to be able to come up with one, and you still want to make something. Random tables make replayability almost infinite. They're great, and I include them. Are they required? No. Are they encouraged? Sure. I think you should use them. Does that mean you have to? No. So, but they work fine because I've got the 20 kilometers, and that way, you don't have to be too persnickety or whatever. But yeah, as far as old school, look for that hard data. That's what I always saw. I saw people arguing over, what volley fire, in Napoleonics. They did tests. They weren't exactly, laboratory detailed. They took out sheets, like bed sheets and shit, and fired into them and counted how many bullets hit and all that sort of stuff. So, but you can do that, and it's a good baseline, for modeling accuracy in a group of Napoleonics. And somebody will go, well, battlefield testing isn't the same as combat. True, but it's still a baseline that has some scientific fact to it. And then maybe you adjust a little bit, you nick a little bit off of each one to account for the fact that nothing's as easy when it's real, when the bullets are coming back in your direction or whatever. Okay, but at least you've got somewhere to start with instead of just playing around with it. How many second editions and revisions were because somebody super wild ass guessed a bunch of rules, and when they played out, people were like, this just doesn't feel right, and then they have to go back and adjust them. Use hard data, and then you don't have to go back and adjust them.